Let's be honest, parenting can be messy and hard, but also so rewarding. In this podcast, we'll share all the ups and downs of parenthood, as well as share some of our favorite tips and tricks for parenting using both our experiences and expertise from our professional lives as a speech and language pathologist and teacher, but also our everyday lives as moms, just trying to balance it all. We're so glad you could join us.
Hello and welcome to And Then We Had Kids. I am very excited. I know Sheena and I are both really excited for this week's episode. We have another guest on our podcast, and we are really excited that they're here to share their story. Sheena and I, we always think about what's going on either in our lives or the lives of those around us. And coming up for April is Autism Awareness Month. And that really has hit home for us in various ways. With our experience in special education, we have had we've supported a lot of families with kids who are on the autism spectrum, but we wanted to also find a mom who is experiencing that herself. So we have Kim here, and Sheena can introduce her even more.
Yeah. So I'm Sheena. I'm the other host of And Then We Had Kids, and I'm super excited to introduce our guest today. Kim Druml is the founder and owner of Simply Blissful Boutique, which specializes in natural bath and body products, including really amazing and unique bath bombs, body butter, sugar scrubs, and so much more. I personally have purchased several of Kim's products, and I enjoy using them as gifts for my nieces or my sister-in-law or whoever. But Kim is also a mom of 4 and a former home daycare owner. Isn't that correct, Kim? I feel like I remember you doing that back in the day.
Yes, I did. I did daycare for almost 10 years out of my house.
Oh my gosh, bless your heart.
No.
So when we're talking about kids, you really truly know what you're talking about.
Yeah. For me, early childhood was always something that was kind of a piece of my heart. I always loved teeny tiny little kids and playing with them and learning about their development. And so that was always something that I wanted to do. And I was very happy and grateful that, my husband was totally on board with me quitting my full-time job after we got married and starting up this little dream that I had of running my own daycare. So
how many kids did you have? I'm also curious about those things. I mean, everyone's always, nowadays, especially with the pandemic, childcare has just been a hot topic of do you do nanny? Are you leaving your own job? Are you sending them to daycare? How many kids did you have?
The most I ever had at one point total was 6, but 3 of them were mine.
Gotcha.
So it was my 3, and then I had another family of 3 other children. So that was
Amazing.
the craziest.
Yeah.
The craziest time.
Crazy and fun, right?
It was. And it was great way for me to work and also socialize my children because they were growing up in this daycare. And it's interesting to see that, especially my 8-year-old is in school with some of these babies that, I would have, I remember there was one boy that was a day older than my 8-year-old and they, I had him growing up and now they're both in 2nd grade and it's just weird, to see there quite a few kids that, I know are now, in, 4th grade, 5th grade. I'm thinking to myself, how did this happen?
You're you're still 3 in my mind, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So knowing that we're entering Autism Awareness Month, obviously Jenny and I can speak about it from the professional lens of supporting students on the autism spectrum, but I thought it would be helpful for our listeners to really just hear from a mom who's experiencing it herself with a child on the autism spectrum. So Kim, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off with a little bit about yourself and your family, and what it's been like kind of navigating this journey of special needs parenting.
Yeah. We have 4 kiddos. They're 15, 8, 7, well, almost 8. So I'll do 15, 7, 6, and 5. So I had 3 within a little under 2.5 years.
Oh my God, you're like power woman. Holy cow.
it's quite funny because we wanted more kids and we tried for a very long time. Yeah. And I found out I had some medical issues and I ended up going through radiation and we just didn't think it was going to happen. And a year later, I found out I was pregnant and I had in May of 2014, a perfect baby boy. And my husband and I did a lot of talking and we just decided to throw caution to the wind. It took us several years to have baby number 2. And we said, if we were lucky to have a third child, we'd be thrilled, like if it happened, So when my second was about 6 months old, I found out I was pregnant again.
Oh my goodness.
And
oh my goodness.
End of August of 2015, I had a little girl. And we said our family was complete. It was perfect. 2 boys, a girl. Everybody has their own room. I just had 2 back-to-back babies. So there was no, inclination of wanting a fourth. And about 3.5 months later, I found out I was pregnant again. And I think I was just at this point, like, of course I am.
Yeah, right. You're like, here we are at the beginning, thinking and all the stress around it. And then, wow, 4. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So my third child, my daughter, and my 4th child, a boy, are a year and 10 days apart. Wow. So they're
gosh,
very, very close in age. So but yes, it's my youngest that we were talking about. But yeah, so life here has always been kind of chaotic and crazy with, always having kids here. But I think it's a lot easier now that they're 5, 6, and 7 and 15. Yeah. I think like the gap always throws people off. I always usually start with, well, I have a 15-year-old and 7, 6, and 5.
Yeah, right. Well,
there's a bunch other.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been fun. There was definitely a few years that were a blur, but it was definitely.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
The baby stage with 3 of them.
Yeah. Yeah. And but they are all super close. And it's great that they're kind of built-in best friends, and
I do love that. Yeah.
It is nice, so I'll take it. It was my bonus gift, my 4th unexpected present is what I call them. Like I didn't expect ever to have 4 children, and I'll take it. I wouldn't change it for a world.
Yeah.
And so having 4, and I feel like, she and I both have 2, that naturally, like, I feel like there comes this like comparison of like what they're each doing when, like the milestones they're hitting or they're not hitting, or like my daughter, like I've said this a few times, like her language is incredible, but she had to go to physical therapy for like walking and crawling and all that stuff. Whereas my son, he's like an animal. He loves crawling on things, fearless. He's starting to talk a little bit more. And you said it was your youngest son that we're kind of going to highlight in this episode. What were some of the signs? And I would imagine, again, having 4, what were some of those signs that you're like, something's like you're different, like something's going on here, or there wasn't any?
There was a lot, and I do think that it had to do with the fact that newborn to 3 was what I had been doing for so long, that it was something that I'd studied so much.
Yeah.
And I always knew, like, I never compared kids because they are all so incredibly unique and beautiful in their own ways. So,
that's so nice to hear. I think it's so hard. And knowing like coming from you and knowing that, like, it's so helpful to like hear that too.
Right. And it's so much easier to say it to people than to really take it in. Because I would have parents that would be like, well, your daughter's walking and mine isn't. I'm like, yeah, but my second born didn't walk until he was, 15, 16 months old. And so, I mean, but you know what? He's pushing 8 and he runs and walks and plays.
You wouldn't know that it was slightly after the quote unquote time that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they all get there in their own time. So for me, it was never, I never thought to compare my youngest. But there were just things that were, very obvious. Like I had mentioned, earlier, like he was crawling by around 4 months old. At one point around 4 months, when he started crawling, he stopped gaining weight. And we went to every specialist that we could go to. He was growing in length, but just not putting on weight. He was eating plenty. Yeah. And finally, a specialist said, is he always this active? And I was just like, well, yeah, this is hardly anything. And here is this like 5-month-old who's crawling around a doctor's office trying to pull himself up. Yeah. And he's like, I think he just needs a high calorie formula. He's burning off way more than he's taking in. And sure enough, he just started growing at that point. But he was walking by 8 months. 9, 10 months, he was starting to crawl out of his crib. So
I can't. When you said 10 months, he's
crawling anxiety.
Crawling out of his crib. Yes. Like, and that was like our first, like, how at 10 months old, a child doesn't have the cognitive ability to realize cause and effect, or really even safety, or any of those things, or even like, you know, even with like a 2-year-old, it would be difficult to say, okay, we're going to put you in a big girl or a big boy bed now, you know, because, you know, what another sibling's on the way or whatever the issue is, you know, transitioning. It's easier to do with a 2-year-old, but it's still a challenge, you know, to do it with pretty much an infant. You know, it was it was a mattress on the floor because we didn't know what else to do, but we couldn't keep them in a crib, you know? So, by 15 months, this sweet little boy, he knew, and you knew it in his face. He would just kind of look at you and give you this cute little smile. But he would climb over baby gates, climb shelves. He was jumping off of couches, anything that he could climb and get into, he was doing it. He was running through my house. But then it got to a point where we started to realize that safety was a major concern. So putting him to bed at night, things like we had to remove all of the furniture from the room because it turned into a gymnasium for him. And obviously that's not safe, you know, but he was, I think the first thing that we did, because he has a walk-in closet in his room that had a dresser in it. So the first thing my husband did was like, well, I'll just get a chain lock and put it up at the top. And here is this little 15 to 18-month-old boy that's like, okay, I'll just slide my mattress across the floor, pile up some stuffed animals in my blankets until I can tippy toe and climb up there. And he would get his foot onto the handlebar and then, or onto the doorknob and reach up.
It was like a challenge. He was like, I see something new. I'm going to try and figure out. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
So it was constantly, but then the second issue was not only keeping him safe in his room, but keeping him in the room so that he wasn't getting out in the middle of the night and sneaking downstairs and, finding things that, you know, at 15, 18 months old, we don't need unsupervised children downstairs in the middle of the night.
Right.
Wow. So, I think the very last thing that we ended up doing, despite all the locks and all the gadgets in this room for him, we ended up having to lock him from the hallway. Like we reversed the door locks. And I remember telling my husband, I'm like, I'm not comfortable with not being able to look in on him. So we sawed a hole or cut a hole in the door. So I'm like, we'll replace it someday. And it's still there. Still
like,
there.
Look a hole.
But I mean, he had a very safe, cozy room. I mean, he had books, he had his loveys and his blankets, but there was nothing in there that could be plugged in because there was like no cords. Because I mean, that was a safety hazard. There was no, you know, we had
like baby proofing to the extreme.
Yeah. So it was the night that we ended up switching the locks on the handles to lock him from the hallway or from the outside. He realized he climbed up on the windowsill and ripped off the safety locks off of his bedroom window. And he fell out of his bedroom window that night and broke his femur.
Oh my gosh.
So during all this,
Well, what was like, I know we'll get to like, okay, the diagnosis in a moment, but like, what was your pediatrician telling you, or if you were asking about them, what were they saying? Like, it may be just this, or were they given any guidance around? I feel like it would just be like, we'll wait and see kind of thing.
At 15 months, I started asking for like an EI evaluation, like this, maybe some OT. Is there, I think my brain never went to autism, but I definitely knew that there was some sort of sensory thing going on. Cause I mean, even when he would walk, he would stomp his feet. Everything with him was very forceful and that gross motor movement was necessary for him. And first my pediatrician said that he was too young to really start looking into sensory issues with him, too young for any sort of diagnosis or medical intervention. By 18 months old, she started saying things like, well, how many kids are you taking care of? Could it just be that you're just too busy and he's just too much for you to handle? And I was like,
oh, that one must have been hard to hear. You're missing the mark. I appreciate maybe coming at it from a helpful way, but not helpful.
Well, and that's what I told him, like, this is what I do for a living.
Right.
So this isn't like, I mean, this isn't,
like,
I am a
talking
tired
about
mom. Yeah. But this is, like, I study this. I know there's something just not, but it was also that mom gut too, where it's just like, this isn't typical behavior of a typical child, and I hate using typical because kids are so different in their own unique way, but
we understand.
I just knew like something was off. And even after him falling out the window, I felt that she still didn't really listen to me. Like things, even that, like, and that whole journey in itself is a total different sidebar. But once we got him healed, and I think Sheena might remember part of the story, it was an entire summer, and we're still working on it. It was an entire summer of just crazy medical stuff that was going on. Aside from his sensory and all this stuff that, we've already been dealing with. But when we got out of that medical storm and back into real life, his things just got worse and worse and worse until one day I went to my pediatrician in complete tears. I had to stand in front of the door and he just wanted to get out. He didn't want to be in that room. He did not want to be near her or anyone at that. He didn't like it. And he was pulling at my shirt, scratching at my stomach, biting me. And when I didn't acknowledge the behavior, or I just tried to kind of like squat down and kind of just hold him, he started slapping or banging his head on the floor and screaming. And she's like, is this how he always is? I'm like, most of the time, yeah. If he doesn't get his way, or if he hears the word no, or things like 4th of July, he reacted the same way with slamming his head onto the concrete. So that's when and at this point, he was about 2.5.
Okay.
When she said, okay, you know what, let's go see like a neuropsych. And this was right in the very, very beginning of COVID. So getting him in anywhere just wasn't happening, and neuropsych evaluations were just not happening, and in-person help wasn't happening. They're like, well, if you think he's a danger to himself, you can admit him. I'm like, that's the last thing I want to do to a 2.5-year-old who just spent 3.5 months in a hospital. Like,
right.
So
wow. Yeah.
We found an amazing neuropsych, and we still see her, and we've been working with her. And then the very first thing that she did was treat him for ADHD.
Okay.
And they put him on medication, and it was the very next day that I texted my husband and I was like, he's just sitting there playing with toys. Like that never happened. Like this was a kid that all he ever did was run and jump and climb and,
Wow.
but it was, on the safety things, like if I had to even go to the bathroom, he would have to go into a booster seat at the kitchen table, buckled up, because he would run outside or he would climb on the countertop. And so I told my husband, I'm like, I just went to the bathroom. He was playing very quietly. I left the door open.
You don't even think about those things, but just like the daily,
right, it was. And within weeks, he started talking for rather than he did a little bit talk at home to us, immediate family, but not to grandparents or aunts or uncles or anybody else. But his language at that point at 2.5 was one word. It would be drink, food, blankie. And one day he just woke up or came up to me. He's like, can I have a drink? And I just was like, who are you?
Like, what? Wait, what? What?
Yeah. So,
wow.
I think the next thing that we did is have him evaluated for a program through our school district. They have they call it an at-risk preschool program for kids who need a little bit extra assistance for kindergarten, whether it's speech therapy, special ed. And they couldn't even evaluate him at first because he was all over the place. And finally we got an evaluation done, and it was just so hard to get any knowledge on what his brain knew because his social and emotional side of things, he didn't want to be around people. And we got him into a program through our district called CDAL, which is the Lake County Special Ed, Department of Special Ed. And between the medication and the school that he has been in, you would never even know that this was a child that, he still is rambunctious and still has struggles, but not nearly to the extent that we saw, a year ago or 2 years ago, most definitely.
Wow. So how did you feel when you got the diagnosis? Was there anything that you wish you would have known?
I think my first reaction was very immature. It was kind of like one of those, I told you, I knew it. I knew that there wasn't, I knew it. Hi, honey. I have a special guest here. Can you get this? Why? Because I'm asking you nicely to do so, okay? I'm almost done.
Yes.
Okay.
It's like mom life at its finest. Here we are recording and a little
perfect.
peanut comes in to say hi. Just, it is what it is. It's life. So
she loves the camera. So, and
Zoom's been her
if
best
anyone
friend.
came down, it would be her.
Yep.
Thank you, honey. I'll be up in a few minutes. Okay. Sorry.
Great.
But yeah, there was that point where I was just like, I knew it. And I have been working so hard to get answers. And I think at the end of the day, it didn't matter to me what they told me. I think it was, between the doctors and the school programs that I went to, it was that validation of, no, you're not crazy. You're not just a tired mom. This is real.
Yes.
And I think it was, family members and friends that were just like, well, you just have a lot going on. I'm like, no, this isn't just a lot going on.
Yeah.
This is more than that. So I think that's when my reaction was like, I told you I wasn't crazy. I knew something wasn't right because he is so perfect, but something wasn't typical or normal or,
you realized that there was support that you could get outside of just you being the best mom that you're being. You had this idea of there's something else that I can do to help him feel good too.
Right.
He doesn't want to feel like he's out of control or I'm sure like being hurt, breaking your femur, like that stinks. Like
Yeah.
what 2.5-year-old wants to be stuck dealing with that. So like just being able, I
Right.
can imagine like, yeah, you are completely validated, and here's some things that we can do.
Right. Yeah. I think that was my biggest thing. And I knew people in the special ed program. This is going to turn into a big show now. Like I remember at one point I reached out to Sheena. I had friends who were special ed teachers and people that I could like, okay, this is what I'm seeing. And I know that something is off, and I just want to do right by my child, and give them the tools that they need. But also at the same time, like I needed tools too. I cannot parent my youngest child the same way that I would parent this little one over here, like if they're, and I know there are variations between neurotypical children where it's, some, need a little bit more of a stern voice, some just a warning, but at the same time, in general, we can't even really talk to our youngest the same way, like idioms and stuff. Like, it's not like I can say, knock it off. He'll look at me and be like, knock what off?
Yeah.
You know, like, what do you mean? Like, and he'll literally
knock something off. He's following your direction, right?
Yeah. That's what it is. So, it was a relief to know that I had a network of friends that, were able to kind of guide me into, okay, this is what you should do next. And this is, how to navigate the situation, and even help me, become a better mom. And even with the school program, teaching me zones of regulation, and learning that, the word no was a trigger to him. And instead of saying, no, you can't have candy before dinner, saying, something along the lines of, what, candy sounds really good. Let's put it right here and we'll eat it after we eat dinner. Or first we'll eat dinner and then we'll have a piece of candy, and just completely having to retrain my brain, and now it just works. And that's just how I talk to, I think, everybody.
Sounds better. Not have to say no, right? They're saying the same thing, but somehow the delivery is incredible. Do you feeling validated? I mean, you had that background. What advice, or what would you say to parents who aren't maybe coming from that lens, who might not even know anything about autism, and they're thinking, something, I'm having kind of some red flags myself about my child. What would you give to parents if they have any questions of like where to start or what to do?
I feel like as a parent, and especially as moms, we have this intuition and this gut feeling. So it's like, if, even if it's something as simple as, my child is a year old and not walking, and that doesn't feel right for you. Oh, and now we've got the, getting an evaluation doesn't hurt at all. And if that can, come back and say, what, yes, your child needs some physical therapy and we'll work with them, or there's absolutely nothing wrong with your child. You have nothing to worry about.
Right.
I mean, having that peace of mind, but at the same time, there's this fine line of, yes, all children are different in their own unique ways, but also recognizing, that intuition of, I just don't feel that this is right. And like, I started with my pediatrician, and as you guys heard, it didn't go very well for me. And I didn't know who to turn to. I was lucky that I was in mom groups, and I had friends who were in the special ed program where it's like, what do I do? This is what I'm seeing, and people are like, oh, well, my child is 7 and they have ADHD and this is how they behave. I'm like, well, okay, he's not 7, but, I think it was just putting myself out there and asking people like, hey, has anybody been down this road before? And I don't think I was ever afraid to ask for help or guidance or knowledge and experience, because I felt, I don't know what's going on. And if somebody can give me some magic potion, then I will take it.
Yeah. You're like, my hands raised over here. Yeah. I'll take
bring it.
Yes.
So with him now being in school, how has that been navigating school supports and IEPs? Like, for someone who obviously, like, we're trained in IEPs, but like from the parent perspective, like navigating your first IEP, how was that, as like from the parent lens, and what would be some tips that you could give parents who might be new to special education or, entering their first IEP?
I had a very little bit of experience with IEPs with my daughter, for speech. And I mean, her IEP was like maybe 3 pages. I mean, it was just this quick little meeting, and it's where these are the areas to work on, easy peasy. And when I went into my youngest, that very first IEP meeting with, I had like the superintendent and my husband, and we're all there, and they hand me this bundle of paper that was probably, oh gosh, I have it down right here. It was well over 1 inch thick. And I'm looking at these pages, and I'm thinking, okay, so my child is, I think it was 2 years and 4 months, I believe, is the age that he was. It's funny how you have like these little things that just stand out. And they were on a lot of levels, scaling him at a 12 to 18 month old. And part of it, seeing that on paper, really broke my heart. But it also wasn't a shock to me, because I mean, things like, he didn't know colors or animals or shapes or sizes. I mean, I knew he didn't know that stuff, but to have it all right in front of me. But I think for me, it wasn't really ever scary or overwhelming. I think I was at a point where I was just so happy to finally be on a path to help and doing what we needed to do as parents and as educators for my son. So, I mean, it had things from, learning shapes and colors to learning letters, numbers. And we have yearly meetings. And I think I always just, after that first initial meeting and him starting school and falling in love with the program that he was in, I never questioned any of the things that they said to me, because I had I've seen the progress that he has made and how much that they have done.
Incredible.
Yeah. So like, it wasn't ever, I think at first it was intimidating, but I had, knowing that, this wasn't like a deposition or a very intimidating situation. This was a meeting to set up what are the steps that the school and the educators can make to provide the best learning environment and give my youngest the tools that he needs to, like where he's at now, head off to kindergarten in a handful of months.
Wow. Yeah, I'm bringing it back a little bit just for listeners who aren't familiar. An IEP is an individualized education plan. And so some students who may need like a little extra support, like Kim said, sometimes it's just for speech, like you're working on your R's or some language goals. And sometimes it's a lot more where you're getting speech, you're getting occupational therapy, you're getting academic support, social work. And so it's really the whole education team coming together and partnering with parents with obviously the goal of supporting kids however they may need it. And ideally, it's a good partnership. And it sounds great, Kim, that you have that. And I know with Sheena and I, when we worked together, I remember one of my first, I think it was like an orientation, a woman who was in charge of everything threw a frozen turkey on the table. Sheena, you weren't in this one with me because you had already been working at the school, but she threw a frozen turkey on the table without saying anything. And, everyone's looking around the room like, what is going on? And she's like, the feeling you guys are having right now, should never be the feeling that a parent has in
Parent
IEP
has,
meeting.
yes.
That
Yeah.
parents should always know what's going on. Parents should always be part of the process of, coming up with goals, or support, or making sure that, just like what you said, Kim, like, you're seeing the progress that should be done. And I like to pride ourselves, that that's what we did.
Yeah.
And again, it's not always the case, but as a parent, you have such a strong voice, and you obviously know your kid the best. But hopefully it's such a process that you can feel good about it and have your kid feel good
Right.
about liking school too. I think that's just so key. That at school is a place where they can feel supported, they can feel good, they can feel like they're also getting what they need. So just wanted to throw that out there for our listeners.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think especially, I think emphasizing the partnership, obviously I'm still in the special education world. And I never want parents to feel anxious going into an IEP meeting. I never want them to be blindsided going into an IEP meeting. I want it to be more of a conversation and reviewing, like you said, the progress, the supports that are going to be in place. So
Right.
it's nice to hear from you, Kim, that you've had such a positive experience with that.
Yeah. I feel like the biggest and most important thing that parents need to know is, I feel like as parents, we really focus on, even with our neurotypical children, doing well and doing their best and exceeding and learning your letters on time and learning to write your name on time and doing all of what everybody else is capable and willing or able to do. And I felt like I had to put my brain in a different perspective with my youngest and just realize that this isn't like a race. Rome wasn't built in a day. We are not. And there are areas on his IEP that he quickly excelled at, and they were able just to say, he's mastered this. We don't need it. There were areas that, especially the social and emotional, that they're still really, really working on. And, we all have our strengths and we all have our weaknesses, but it also is knowing that, you're communicating with the teachers and vice versa of, I see that, he is writing his name. And if you were to ask him how to spell his name, he can verbalize it and he can spell out his older siblings' names at 5 years old, which is remarkable. But you take a toy away from him and it's a completely different, mentality. And there are going to be things that don't get mastered as quickly as others, and that's okay. So I think going into those meetings and hearing, well, your child still hasn't mastered this area doesn't necessarily mean that your child is failing. It just means that we need to either find a new strategy or we need to keep working at it, and they will get it. But knowing that they have that support and that guidance, I think was always reassuring to me, where it's like, okay, I know social emotional is where we struggle with the most. So
yeah. And I think something to keep in mind is that there's a saying, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. Because everyone is so different, right? So you can have someone on the autism spectrum who is really just has some struggles with the social emotional, domain. You can have someone who might be a nonverbal communicator. There's just such a vast, that's why it's a spectrum disorder, right? The spectrum is huge. So I think just recognizing that every child is different. Every child has, their unique qualities, their unique strengths, areas for growth. But that you can't compare. It's not there are no apples to apples, or when it comes to autism. So
and I think that was, when I had said, like, you can't compare children, they all develop in their own ways. Realizing, especially visiting my youngest at school and seeing the difference between, all of there's 9 kids in his class, in each unique way. It was like, very opening, to realize that this isn't just a, diabetes or,
Right.
even with ADHD, it's a very kind of simple, I don't want to say simple diagnosis because it's not simple at all, but, learn that one. But it's almost like a blanket diagnosis where this is like, you can,
there's like a very clear cut like diagnosis. There's several recommended treatment plans, right? We know the strategies that work for kids with ADHD, whereas kids on the autism spectrum are it's trying to figure out the puzzle pieces for them.
right. And that's been, I feel like, the hardest but most rewarding part of raising my youngest is learning, okay, how can I approach this situation without causing an explosive meltdown, knowing like I had talked about, like the candy before breakfast or before dinner, or when, because like siblings do, sometimes we don't always share very nicely and we take toys, and learning that, wait, hold on, stop, and I know one of his teachers actually wrote him a social story that was talking about, it's okay to be angry and it's okay to be mad, but it's not okay to hurt. And so then it was like, like he really liked that story. He really connected with it. So we just kept saying it. We kept, like, I see you're mad. It was really learning that he really thrived when I named and acknowledged his emotions and guided him through it. Cause I felt like especially with him, he didn't or doesn't know how to handle those extreme emotions, whether it is extreme joy or extreme tired or extreme anger or frustration. He doesn't know how to name it or navigate through it. So learning how, I think was it's still a challenge, and I am far from perfecting it, but being able to kind of navigate that with him and see him develop more, and, with like my other kids, I'd be like, hey, he had it first, give it back,
Yeah. And kind of like lastly, as we talked a lot about your experience with him and going through it, but then also I feel like we've kind of guided over this part of like, you have this little boutique thing or like what you do on the side. Like, I just want to know, like, what do you do for you? I think being a mom, it has its joys and brings a lot of highs, a lot of lows. What do you do for you? Like, how do you find time? What do you like to do?
My little boutique is it's my happy little accident. I had always been one of those natural mamas without being like too crazy, but I tried to, many, many years ago, reduce as many chemicals as possible in my life and be cleaner to the environment. And I just always made my own lotions and bath bombs or bath salts, and I used essential oils, and that was always something that I've always been very passionate about. And I did it. That was like my therapy. When kids would go to bed at night, I would make bath bombs, and sometimes I would sell them. Way, way back in the day, I would, give gift baskets to, a mom who needed some self-care, or, and it timed up really perfectly with Austin and his injuries in 2019. COVID hit and everything shut down right before Easter, and nobody could go shopping for Easter gifts, and everyone was supporting small businesses. So my business just took off and turned into a full-time job. And I have a website. I do wholesale orders now, and
tell people, where can they find you?
On Facebook, my group is called Simply Blissful Boutique, and it's simplyblissfulboutique.com is my website. And it's strictly all out of my house. I try to do office hours during the day, and then when kids go to bed, I turn my music up and grab myself a mom drink, and I just go create and fulfill orders. And
I love it. Oh, we're like getting a little sneak peek of what you got going on. Oh my gosh, amazing.
We're cleaning out linen closets, so that's all blankets to be donated. But yeah, this is just my whole dining room is, ingredients and shelving racks and all the crazy. I've got.
And I will say that Kim does these really cute designs. And so like at Christmas, she's got like snowmen or ones that look like Santa. I think I've gotten like unicorn ones for my nieces. Yeah. So they're not just like the plain bath bombs that you can get at like Target. They're really cute and creative. So just a big shout out for that.
Yeah. Gnomes. And I have your typical round ones and just plain lavender, but yeah, I do like to find molds and kind of do stuff that's out of the box. And I think it ties in well with my kids and being a parent, I think every child goes through a stage of not wanting to take a bath. So that's when I think it started with my 7-year-old, where I was like, well, I wonder if I made him like a superhero bath bomb, if he'd be excited about it. So and it worked. And I was like, maybe I'm onto something here. This could be a niche. And
my 3-year-old loves bath bombs. So
yeah, fun for all ages.
Yeah. So, well thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing a little bit about your story.
Yeah. Any last words of advice or what you want people to know when they think about their autism, or just really highlighting this Autism Awareness Month?
The only thing that I could say is in the very early stages, I generally felt like I was crazy. Or people made me out to think like, oh, he's too young. He's just a baby. And it's, just really believing that inner thought and knowing that there are thousands of parents and, educators and people out there who will stop what they're doing in a heartbeat. Like if anybody ever sent me a message and said, hey, can I ask you a question? Because my child's doing X, Y, and Z. I'd be like, I got you. Let's talk, and I feel like there is a community out there that is so incredibly supportive, and all you have to do is just open the door for yourself and not be afraid to ask for help, because there will be millions of people that'll reach out to you with open arms, and you're definitely not alone. So
that's awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Yeah. Thank you, Kim.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all of the latest, you can follow us on Instagram @_andthenwehadkids. Thanks again. And like we say, life used to be carefree, and then we had kids.